Hollywood is the embodiment of the American dream.
Hollywood is a media triumph.
It entertains, makes billions.
Greed is good.
And it makes wars real. It's like war porn. But what's the message behind the pictures?
It is a celebration of not only our virtue, but our power.
And who is calling the shots? This is Empire. The fog of war is confusing. Battle lines are blurred. But war has become entertainment.
Got him!
Hello and welcome to Empire. I am Marwan Bishara. Entertainment and war. Hollywood and the Pentagon, strange bedfellows. In this program, we'll examine the surprising symbiotic relationship between the movie industry and the military-industrial complex and ask, what's wrong with this picture? Someone who knows about war and the movies is highly decorated Vietnam veteran and winner of 8 Academy Awards, director and screenwriter Oliver Stone, and Oscar-winning director and thorn in the flesh of the American establishment, Michael Moore, and war correspondent, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, and author Christopher Hedges. As Hollywood goes to war, the Pentagon goes to Hollywood.
Since the dawn of American cinema, Hollywood has had a fascination with war.
Americans traditionally love to fight. That's why Americans have never lost and will never lose a war.
Propaganda movies helped build support for World War I and II, so much so that the Pentagon started giving the studios access to military bases, aircraft, ships, and submarines, even to off-duty officers acting as extras in their free time. The Hollywood Pentagon love affair soon became official. The military even created a whole new division, the Film Liaison Unit, with offices at the Pentagon and in Los Angeles.
The relationship between Hollywood and the Pentagon has been described as a mutual exploitation.
General, welcome, Mr. Stark.
We're after military portrayal, and they're after our equipment.
Multi-million-dollar toy. Lessons for actors on how a military moves. You know, what would make the dialogue sound more real, even down to making the uniforms look accurate.
Most people these days, they're getting their information on who their army is from what they see on television. So that's our mission here, to help filmmakers portray the army in an accurate or plausible manner. And it's to help recruiting.
This marriage of interest has its compromises. In exchange for support, the Pentagon gets access to scripts and, by contract, can ask for changes.
If you're willing to play ball and allow the changes that they want you to make, you get this stuff basically for free. You have to pay for the fuel if there's a jet flying around.
We actually have a menu. This type of a helicopter, it costs this many thousands of dollars per hour, and they need to reimburse the taxpayer for that expense.
But it's much cheaper to borrow the military's tanks than it would be to, you know, buy your own tank.
After the film is completed, the admirals and generals will review it before it's released to the general public, with their thanks to the Pentagon for its cooperation in all the various branches. Phil Strube is really the head of the whole operation. He is often thanked in movies, so if you were to go to IMDb and type in his name, Phil Strube, you'll see all the movies that he's worked on.
But the Pentagon can also say thanks, but no thanks. Films like Platoon or Apocalypse Now, showing the dirty face of the Vietnam War, were denied support.
For some of those Vietnam-era pictures, every time soldiers or Marines went out into the field, they murdered officers, massacred civilians, they took drugs, and I think that the feeling was that wasn't quite an accurate portrayal.
So is the true face of war what the military's film unit is after?
We are looking for a reasonably realistic portrayal of military people Does that translate to positive portrayal? And the answer to that is somewhat.
After many pictures of veterans coming home damaged by the Vietnam War, Top Gun presented the perfect opportunity to rehabilitate the image of the military on the big screen. It was the most successful film mission accomplished.
They shaped that picture top to bottom, made it just the way they wanted, and they actually put recruiting booths inside the theaters so that after people saw the movie, they could join up. Recruitment took a huge spike up when that movie came out. And that's when they really realized, boy, this kind of thing really works. It's almost like subliminal advertising.
Take a look at that DVD.
Filmmakers hoping to get that kind of support now know what the military is looking for.
We don't have any preconceived showstoppers. Sacrifice, dedication, loyalty to the unit, those are some of the most important values.
Even defeat can be shown, as long as the U.S. military still looks heroic, like in Black Hawk Down, featuring the bloody 1993 U.S. mission in Somalia. A film that could not have been made without the Pentagon's Black Hawk helicopters. To have a seat at the production table, the relationship has now become even more open, allowing for some creative license.
I am Optimus Prime.
When you're fighting alien robots, realism's out the window.
I think the only thing that's really taboo would be if the military was portrayed as a force for evil, and this behavior was tolerated. There are consequences to their bad behavior.
Full metal jacket.
So, shooting a civilian, issuing illegal orders, torture, you cannot show that on screen unless you also show that that person was punished.
That's all we ask for.
Is that really all the Pentagon asks for?
I looked at tens of thousands of pages of correspondence between the producers and the military over script changes, and it's really shocking the amount of control that they try to exert.
This is what lays out that it has to be, beneficial to recruitment and retention of personnel.
Take Wind Talkers, a film about the Navajo Indians, used by the U.S. military as code talkers in World War II because the Japanese couldn't translate their language. The film did get Pentagon support, but only under clear conditions.
The Pentagon said, no, we won't show soldiers being ordered to shoot other soldiers, and besides, it never even happened. Well, it did happen. The way they compromised was that they hinted at that in the movie.
Under no circumstances can you allow your code talker to fall into enemy hands.
The actual order to kill them is never presented on screen.
Your mission is to protect the code at all costs. You understand me?
So that's how they got around that.
In other cases, there was no way around it. 13 Days, a Kevin Costner production about the 1962 missile crisis, shows belligerent generals trying to push President Kennedy to go to war with Cuba.
My boys will get those red bastards.
The film was denied support, even if Kennedy's taping system proves the story to be true.
They don't want to be seen as the ones who would have caused World War III. So the producers had to go to the Philippines, and they had to rent jet airplanes of that era that didn't fly anymore, but they just had to drag them around on the tarmac behind tractors and then use computer-generated imaging to make them look like they were flying. Fortunately, they stuck to their guns. It would have been an insult to history.
The Hurt Locker is an interesting case. Initially, the military was going to give them support, and then at the last minute, the military pulled out.
Get back! Get back!
The liaison officer who was going to go and observe the filming learned that before he got there, some scenes had been filmed. He alleges that were not in the approved script, and that insinuated a war crime, that a detainee would be shot by the military. And that's one of those red lines for the military.
Since military equipment is paid for by the taxpayers, some argue the government shouldn't give or deny access to it just based on a film's message.
The mission of the Department of Defense is to defend the nation, not to make films. So we're under no obligation. That's not our mission.
Well, that might be fine if it weren't for the First Amendment.
Well, I haven't noticed anything in the U.S. Constitution that requires the Department of Defense to provide support to any filmmaker who comes along.
The government cannot favor speech that it likes and not give the same benefits to speech that it doesn't like. The Supreme Court ruled in 1995 that discrimination against speech because of its message is presumed to be unconstitutional. The government offends the First Amendment when it imposes financial burdens on certain speakers based on the content of their expression. This is exactly what the Pentagon is doing.
So is this marriage of convenience legitimate and good for films, after all?
Damn it, we got a unit under fire!
When you're working with the government looking over your shoulder, are we really seeing what the writer would have written without that censor? I don't think so.
Hollywood must be one of the most intrusion-proof institutions in the galaxy. If they don't like our input, our technical advice, they'll be the first people to say, you know what, no thanks.
Many successful independent films are indeed made without support, but sometimes at high cost. Filmmakers are free to decide, lose their independence or lose a lot of money.
Hollywood likes it the way it is now because it's much cheaper. The big loser in all this is the audience. What you're getting is sort of steady drip, 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 drip of propaganda being put into American films. And over the years, I believe that the real danger of this is that it's made the American people more warlike.
Oliver, as an archaeologist, if you will, of the American culture, as an insider and outsider, how do you see the relationship between Washington and LA and Hollywood?
Power is power. It comes from the barrel of a gun. The establishing principle of society is war. Society cannot exist without its ability to make war. And we have maintained a military state, a profound military state since 1945. We never let it go. After World War II, we became the only surviving power. And we built up our nuclear arsenal in the 1950s to incredible proportions. We can blow up the world 100 times over. We were stronger even than the Soviets, far stronger, although we pretended that they were stronger than we were. And we created the fear. It's a tremendous mechanism of media and government power, and also economics. The military-industrial complex is the single largest economic entity in the United States, as Eisenhower warned.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
So many trillions of dollars flow into that part of the economy that it's almost too late to go back and say, how can we dismantle it?
Chris, you wrote a book that said something about war, a force that gives us meaning. Is it also a force that gives Hollywood meaning, or is that how America is using Hollywood into expanding its war culture?
Well, it's broader than Hollywood. I mean, that mythic war narrative sells, and you can see it on the news. You can see it across the cultural spectrum because it is an elevation of us. It is a celebration of not only our virtue, but our power. And that is very enticing, especially as you have larger and larger segments of the American population that is being rendered powerless, being disenfranchised. In the build-up to the Iraq War, people latched on to this celebration of ourselves, celebration of our power, and by extension our own power. And that, of course, Hollywood was guilty of that. But so was CNN, so was the New York Times, so was all of the major communications outlets that disseminated information or mythology to the American public.
Oliver, as an outsider to America, I tell you, what's the point of the Pentagon when you have the Hollywood? Hollywood is a far better instrument to serve American interests than the Pentagon has been.
You need a Pentagon because you need the real thing. The Pentagon is a church. If you accept the idea that war is sacred, there's a sacred aspect to war in American Christian, in Western Christian culture. But so what happens is, let's say, is war is sacred, therefore the church is the Pentagon, and the soldiers are the priests.
We're moving into the valley of the shadow of death.
which is why you cannot criticize soldiers in American movies, because they're the priests. They're warriors of God. They get screwed up, but they always do their job well. You humanize the soldiers, but you're not allowed in American mythology to give a background as to why they're fighting. They could be killing Arabs, or they could be fighting in the worst kind of war, whether it's in Iraq or Lebanon or Afghanistan, but there's no background given. It's always about making the American soldier the priest of God.
But the thing is, Michael, probably for you too, Chris, every other movie that I've seen throughout, when I grew up, probably you did too, was all about how the American goes out there and civilizes the people. It's always been about civilizing other people, whether it's fiction or fact.
Well, we grew up watching those World War II movies, and we all probably grew up, playing war out in the neighborhood as 7 or 8 year olds, or we had cap guns. We really grew up in that culture, especially as males. And once presented with the reality, once in Vietnam, and realizing that the whole thing is a sham, that we're being used as pawns in this, well, nothing will turn people around faster than when they realize they've been lied to, especially about being brought into a war.
Is that the new cultural imperialism that we talk about, how America adopts this view of itself, but also exports this view and its wars, its domestic violence around the world?
The difference between a dream, something as articulated by Martin Luther King, is that you strive towards a dream. You live within an illusion. And that illusion of who we are, where we're going, and what we can become there's a wider and wider gap between that and reality. And the problem with living within an illusion is that it allows you to perpetuate a kind of eternal infantilism, childishness, where reality is never an impediment to what I want. But as the walls break down, as it's your house that's foreclosed, when you realize that your job and the job of your neighbors these jobs are not coming back, that when you go bankrupt for your medical bills, then you react as a child, which is to call for a savior, a demagogue, someone who promises moral renewal, vengeance, and new glory. And we're already seeing these proto-fascist movements leaping up around the fringes of American society, and it is because our empire is imploding. It itself is an illusion. If we don't face that illusion, we're finished.
You wrote the book, The Empire of Illusions, but Michael Moore, you've actually chronicled the illusions from within the society, from Bowling for Columbine all the way through Capitalism: A Love Story. You've actually demystified all these things that Chris is talking about. But you also succeeded. I mean, there is a market for those ideas.
Yeah, I guess it turns out I've made the only Iraq War film that has made any money at the box office. Since then, there's been a lot of articles written about how all these other films haven't made much money, and there have actually been some very good films. But I made Fahrenheit 9/11 in the first year of the war, and I made it at a time when what I believed was in the minority of what the country believed. And just sat there in the hotel room flicking through all the stations, and each commentator was going, well, that's the end of Michael Moore. Well, that's the end of his career. Why did he say that? I don't know. Well, he's not going to get any help in this town. And it was just like one after another basically saying that I was over. And after about an hour of watching that, I started to believe it. And I just decided to put my head down and go and make this film about what I thought was the big lie that we were being told.
Major combat operations in Iraq have ended. In the Battle of Iraq, the United States and our allies have prevailed.
And contrary to what everybody said would happen, a film to the date has grossed about $500 million worldwide. And the question's been posed then, why haven't these Hollywood films with actors done anywhere near that?
Oliver, you and Michael apparently opened the doors to a revisionist reading of American policy and American society, what Americanism is, and so on and so forth. But since 9/11, the movies that are, especially those who are critical of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, they haven't done very well. Unlike your movies, unlike his documentary. Why do you think that is?
It's pointing the finger in the national wound. It's the inability to face ourselves. This is a tough reality.
But look at Born on the 4th of July. Look at Wall Street. Look at, of course, we said Platoon. Look at your other movies. Look at Nixon. Look at JFK. I mean, these are money-making machines. People love them in the United States and around the world. So why are you still in the minority in Hollywood? That's my question.
Well, let's say that films can make money around the world and can dissent, but American corporations cannot do that. They have to go into countries, they're economic machines, and they have to find ways to exploit the resources of that country. So if America sells the idea that it's militarily powerful, like with Pearl Harbor was hugely successful, so was Black Hawk Down. To some degree, you could say we were soldiers, so was Saving Private Ryan. But they sell the idea of awe. Technology is worship.
But is it hard to make a movie while we're living the war?
Very.
Is it why that people are a bit repulsed by the idea of being at war but also criticizing the war in movies?
Michael got away with it because he went after Bush. He was very smart. He personalized it.
I think part of it is my goofy Midwestern attitude, but I have a lot of optimism about the American people. Yes, we're a little slow on the uptake. We don't get it right at first, but generally most Americans, and I think you know this, you've met a lot of us, right? We're somewhat charming on some level, right? Once we learn the truth about something, we respond in the right way. And I think that after Fahrenheit and after some media people started to do their job and got the truth out there, and the people realized that this war was a sham, that the people started to come around, and eventually, in a few years, the people were against the war. So, I guess I have a lot of faith that if they're just presented with the truth, that they'll do the right thing.
Let's talk about this demonization. There are a culture, thousands of movies that are produced by Hollywood that are always demonizing someone, whether they are the Russians or the Germans, and as of lately, since 9/11 at least, a lot of demonization of the Arabs.
Racism sells. It always has. And, for every platoon, how much crap do they produce?
I am taking over this airplane. You will cooperate.
And people eat it up because it's, at its core, it's a celebration of me. It's a celebration of us. And nationalist fervor is not only about self-exaltation, but always with nationalism comes this racism, the denigration of other.
But it's the myth about oneself. Every nation, every nationalism has myth at its center. What is it about the American myth that is so central around power and around violence?
Well, I watched societies from Argentina to Yugoslavia drink that dark elixir. Nobody's immune from it. I don't think nationalism is peculiar in any way to the United States. It is a disease. It infects every country I've ever been in. The problem is, of course, that the United States can act on it through systems of violence that are denied to most other countries. And that's a big difference. And we believe that because we have the capacity to wage war, we somehow have a right to wage war. I don't think that there's anything more morally perfidious about Americans. I have a fairly dark view of human nature. The problem is that, of course, we can do it, and so we do it. And that makes us, when we wed that kind of violence to that kind of mythic narrative about ourselves, it makes us very, very dangerous.
I'll be back after the break with more from Oliver Stone, Michael Moore, and Christopher Hedges, examining Hollywood's role as the chronicle of American history. Welcome back. Hollywood has conjured fantasies out of reality so convincingly for so long that all too often people are lost between fact and fiction. Truth, the first casualty of war, is also the first casualty of Hollywood. While cinema has long imitated reality, increasingly reality is imitating Hollywood.
For almost 100 years, Hollywood has been the world's most persuasive chronicler of America's history.
Commence firing. Fire at will.
And its place in the world.
Movies matter because they frame our understandings of things.
What will happen to me now?
This is, in a sense, is a very public face of America.
You let me worry about that, Green Beret. You're what this is all about.
But if the victors always write the history, how reliable is the chronicle?
I got your position, I got the target. We're inbound hot.
And what role does Hollywood play in America's wars?
I will be the first to set foot on the field, and I will be the last to step off, and I will leave no one behind, dead or alive.
Hollywood films almost universally accept that American power is a benevolent force within the world.
Hollywood's myth-making began with one of the first and most famous of all cinema epics. Birth of a Nation was supposed to be a true-life account of the United States' own birth pangs. The reality was rather different.
Birth of a Nation presented a very racist view of black people and was actually used in the end by the Ku Klux Klan as a recruitment vehicle.
Once upon a time, Hollywood filmmakers were, briefly, prepared to stand up to the military and tell it like it was.
After Vietnam, the American military is often represented fundamentally as corrupt.
What are you smiling at, huh? You want something to smile at, huh?
The soldiers might be good people, but they've been corrupted by their service in a fundamentally unjust war. The military is shown as actually dangerous.
Fire in the hole!
And then America woke up to terrorism.
The people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
As the White House geared up for its self-declared war on terror, President Bush sent his most trusted advisor, Karl Rove, to seek Hollywood's help in marketing the war.
Concrete information told with honesty and specificity and integrity is important to the ultimate success in this conflict.
One of the sort of key purposes of the meeting was to say, look, we have got a kind of public campaign here to wage, which is to persuade both Americans and the wider world that the war on terror is just, proportionate, and legitimate. And I think it's fair to say that the representatives of that said industry, put up their hands and said, how can we help?
Since then, that help has involved overt attempts at censorship. And when Hollywood director Brian De Palma tried to use drama to bring home true stories of US troops raping and killing in Iraq, the studio cut the final scene showing real-life victims, and then ensured very few people would ever see the film.
And if any movie theater in your neighborhood shows this vile film redacted, let's stand out in front of the theater with the same sign, support the troops.
The message isn't lost on Hollywood.
Excuse me, Mr. Anwar El Ibrahim?
Yes? Step out of line and be stepped on.
Follow us, please. Put him on a plane.
The result, even when directors try to take a critical view, somehow the film's morality gets watered down.
The overall message of rendition is a little bit confused because it's not entirely clear, what is really being disapproved of here.
There are upwards of 7,000 people in central London alive tonight because of information that we elicited just this way.
Are we disapproving of rendition itself, or do we disapprove of rendition because it actually is not effective? So there's a kind of argument here which says, if you could be certain you were really targeting the bad guys, then rendition is okay.
I'm Charlie Wilson. I represent the Texas 2nd Congressional.
Tom Hanks may have made us laugh at US Congressman Charlie Wilson's real-life efforts to help the Mujahideen fighting Soviet-Russian troops in Afghanistan. But judicious use of the studio's scissors by an unseen hand ensured that a key link between 1980s Afghanistan and events closer to home was kept from the audience.
Charlie Wilson's War is a very interesting case. Got hold of a copy of the original script. The original script makes a very clear link between the US arming the Mujahideen in Afghanistan in the 1980s and the causes of 9/11. Now, we know from a CIA advisor who was on set, he says we deliberately made sure we excised that from the film. And of course the end product is a much more tame version.
So can the medium of the age, the voice with the power to change the world, or at least the way we view it, ever be anything more than the cheerleader for America and its military adventures?
For your consideration, the Jericho.
Oliver, you are, whether you like it or not, a historian. Do you think that Hollywood, in a sense, was a chronicle of empire?
Yes, I do. I do. I think, you know, movies are made for different reasons, and there's, you know, they're done sometimes for propaganda, and they're sometimes done for dramatic effect. But essentially, the war movie has embraced the idea of America cannot be defeated, America must win. It's an impossible,
at least in Hollywood.
It's an impossible ideal to live up to, because we were fighting in Vietnam at that time, and although we were bombing the hell out of the place, we were getting, they didn't want us. It was clear that we were losing that war with the people level, at the hearts and the minds level. We did not belong in Vietnam. Every Vietnamese knew we were going to be leaving, and of course it was a disaster for America in many ways, although we left Vietnam a very ruined country, and we, in fact, you could say we won the war. We demolished the place.
Chris, do you think an average viewer in this country can tell the difference between the history that Oliver Stone puts in his movies and any mythical story? Can Americans really tell when they watch Platoon or watch just a fiction on Vietnam?
Because we lost the war in Vietnam, we've not been able to mythologize that war. There was that period after the Vietnam War when we were humbled, even humiliated, that we were forced to ask questions about ourselves that we had not asked, that we did what Oliver Stone has done, not just in Platoon, but in other movies, where he stepped back and we had to see ourselves as others saw us. And it was a very unpleasant and difficult moment, but a very, very important moment in American history, because we became a better nation. And you watched the war makers, Reagan being paramount, resurrect the good name of war. And that when we've resurrected that mythic vision of war, what we have resurrected is that love affair with death. And so that these movies that Michael mentioned that are good, the American public can't hear it.
But Michael, in Middle America, Americans are not necessarily imperial in any possible way. What 90% of them don't even hold passports. They're not even curious about the rest of the world. Is there something in this country that worships empire in the way it does?
Well, I think that in order to create fear of any group, anybody that's out there, the boogeyman that's out there that's going to kill us, so we must kill the boogeyman first, you need ignorance. And in order to have an enforced system of ignorance, you first have to totally debase the educational system, which we've done in this country.
But that does strengthen Hollywood's role ever more, but as the educator, as the historian, that people listen to, that they watch, and
yes, but I think for every Red Dawn or a Black Hawk Down, there's a Platoon, there's a Salvador.
Is there? Or are they in the minority?
No. Honestly, I think there was a whole series of films from the late 70s up until Oliver's film, The Platoon, that really took on the Vietnam War. And since then, I think, geez, how many films have been made about Iraq? And maybe a dozen at this point, and I'd say 10 of them have had a distinctive anti-war bent to them. The reason people haven't gone to see them, I think, is because, as Oliver said, we know we're complicit in this. We know that our tax dollars are going to fund the killing of civilians, using Predator drones now in Pakistan to kill innocent civilians. And after working hard all week To go to the movie theater on a Friday night and be reminded that you are a part of the Annihilators.
You also experienced war, a decorated war hero, and you've done all these movies about wars. In real life, Oliver, America hasn't been winning wars. In Hollywood, it has been winning wars. And I will pose to you the question once again. When you have Hollywood with such an incredible soft power influence around the world, why the heck do you need the Pentagon in the first place?
Well, you need the Pentagon to supply the weaponry. And Hollywood is a media triumph, if you'd like, if you want to call it that. And we still want to see movies, and we may be atrocity freaks or whatever you want, but you know, we love Lawrence of Arabia, we love the spectacle, we love Bridge on the River Kwai. You know, these are, and they're all flawed movies. I mean, Lawrence of Arabia, at its heart, it's about the Arab Empire, is a lie. It's a complete lie. Lawrence knew that the Arabs were set up by the English and were being used by the English, and he said so in his memoirs. He said, I was ashamed, it was a despicable thing, but I did it because we had to win rather than lose. Be that as it may, in order to do that, he led 100,000 Arabs to their deaths for the British Empire, who were very happy to use the Arabs and then betray them and take over their lands and exploit them. So that's Lawrence of Arabia. But David Lean managed to do that movie, and it's regarded as one of the best movies of all time. So there's a paradox here. You know, when I saw Black Hawk Down, I felt the same way perhaps you did. I felt disgusted, because I could see the audience was loving this movie. It was nominated for an Academy Award. Best Picture, Jerry Bruckheimer. And what was it about? Technology and slaughtering people. Immensely powerful images. And of course, every American had to be revenged by 50 Africans killed.
And then we have a film that's won the Oscars, several of them. And as I said, Michael, you criticized, you thought it was apolitical. Could you elaborate a bit?
I was very disturbed by it the first time I saw it. I went back a second time because it really, it offended me on a number of levels. First, just as a filmmaker, if I want you on the edge of your seat, there's some very easy ways I can do that. And one of them is showing someone trying to figure out should they snip the red wire or the green wire.
Yes.
If they snip the wrong wire, they blow up. Trust me, that'll work every time, okay? It's not genius filmmaking. It had a pornographic quality. It's like NASCAR in a way. You go to NASCAR waiting for the car crash. You watch hockey for the fight, not for the puck going into the goal.
Yeah, that's true.
And Hurt Locker, you're waiting for the next guy to blow up. And because of the purient nature of that, it's like war porn. That's what it felt like to me. It had nothing to say about the war, and that's why it was so lauded by critics and everybody, you know, because finally an Iraq war film that doesn't take a, you know, that left-wing position or that anti-war position, you know. And I don't know what the point of view of this film was, to defuse a bomb. Why is the bomb there? Because invaders have come into the country. And everyone has the right to defend their country if people come in there with guns to take over the country. You know, the reason, and this is in my humble opinion, why this hasn't worked, why Afghanistan won't work, why we haven't had our moment of figuring out that we've really lost both wars, even though the media is trying to work very hard now at pushing how we really now won Iraq. Look how great things are. There's many ways you could become free of a despot. You could do it through violence, as we did it. You can do it through nonviolence, as Gandhi did it, threw off the empire. You can do it like the Canadians do it. Just wait, they'll get cold enough and they'll leave, you know. The one way that doesn't work is going in to a country and saying, we're here to free you. We're here to give you democracy through the barrel of our gun. That just doesn't work. If the Iraqi people had wanted to overthrow Saddam Hussein, they would have done that.
Chris, how did you feel about using the quote from your book as opening of the Hurt Locker, and why did that? How do you see that? What does that mean at all?
I was also, like Michael, disturbed by the film. It was really, pornographic is the right word. We were playing out our violent fantasies and pathologies on one-dimensional figures who had no real humanity. So the movie attempted to tell a very narrow truth about war, which was a theme of my book, which is that violence and war can function as a kind of narcotic that will destroy you. I mean, it has an addictive quality to it. It's one I experienced as a war correspondent, and why I and other war correspondents leapt from war to war to war for, in my case, 2 decades. So I'm in Kosovo with people I covered the war in El Salvador with 20 years earlier. But it'll kill you. It'll kill you psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, and finally physically.
You're pessimistic about this country and how it views itself and how it views its role around the world.
Yeah, maybe I spent too long on the receiving end of American firepower in places like Gaza, but I think that...
which is absent, by the way, from many of these movies. We talked about...
Of course.
Did you say many?
Yeah,
Are you being kind?
From all.
Most?
But all of these movies, the other is absent, of course.
Well, the problem is that, it is when you view an occupation or a military campaign, however enlightened that viewing may be, through the lens of the occupier, number one, and number two, through the lens of an occupier who's armed. Because in a war zone, there is a huge disparity between the godlike power. We used to say, give a 19-year-old kid an automatic weapon and it takes them 4 days to become God. That power to revoke another person's charter to live on this earth, and the powerless. And there's almost nothing in between in a war zone. And if you want to understand war, you have to, and you've done this, you have to step outside that armed unit with the sheer unmitigated terror that is visited upon the innocent and the defenseless, who constitute the vast majority, 95+% of those in a war zone live in a state of perpetual terror. And the dehumanization, I was deeply disturbed by the dehumanization of the Iraqis in the Hurt Locker, who had really no humanity at all. It is true that at the end of the movie, it redeemed itself by showing how demented that character had become, and yet that demented character who goes back to Iraq is allowed to play out that murderous pathology on people who, by the end of the film, again, don't resonate as human beings. And that I find very disturbing. Mm-hmm. I think that finally the best war films have to eschew any image of violence, because that fascination with the godlike power to deliver violence often overpowers the message, especially if you're a young kid who's going to employ those weapons.
So what does it really say about America today that Hollywood is the chronicle of Americanism, of American empire?
Well, first of all, I mean, in defense of our country, we're a young country compared to other countries and other cultures. Most of the great art forms were invented by people in your part of the world, people in Europe, in Africa. By the time we came, we've given the world jazz and the movies. Those are essentially our two artistic contributions, right? And
no,
maybe the Broadway musical. I'll throw that in there. But this is our great American art form, the cinema. And I think the reason why people around the world love to go to it is because it is escapist, it is exciting, it is usually well done. And I feel, the best film I've seen so far in this year is a film called The Green Zone. Yeah. Yet, this film is so smartly done. Yeah. It takes so many risks, and yet Universal Pictures marketed this film as a Matt Damon action film, like it was Bourne Identity 5. And lots of...
It was filmed that way.
Yeah, lots of things going off, and explosions and bombs or whatever. I went back and I saw it a second time. I counted the total number of people killed in the Green Zone. 4. 4 people killed. The Iraqis portrayed in the film are portrayed as human beings, and are essentially the heroes of the film as they lead Matt Damon to the truth about the lies that are being told about what's going on here in Iraq.
It is not for you to decide what happens here.
It's a very powerful film. marketed as an action film, which nobody wanted really to go see, and I feel bad about that because I thought it was a very brave film to make, and I want to encourage that amongst other American filmmakers to make those films. And I thank you for hanging in there all these years. History will record that the films that you gave us were those brave moments of truth-telling.
Thank you, Michael. It's really...
Michael, Chris, we're going to have to wrap it up. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We watch movies not to be educated or informed. We watch to be entertained, to be tricked by images, dazzled and swept off our feet by fantasies. But it's because we open our hearts and surrender our minds to the screen that we are all too easily open to manipulation, no less by movies based on true stories or inspired by real war events. In fact, as we prepared for this show, I asked for real war footage to underline its horrors, but was told real wars are badly filmed and therefore hardly effective, that manufactured images are far more convincing. Well, I rest my case. And that's the way it goes. Write to me at empire@aljazeera.net, and thank you for watching.